Hello, and welcome back. Unless you're new, well then, hi. Today I wanted to dive into the deepest, darkest depths of hip-hop, and talk about the top 5 most disturbing rap albums of all time. In my opinion, of course. Now, I know a lot of people are going to ask where some Necro albums are, or maybe even some different albums from the artist on the list, but I chose these specifically for different reasons. Even though some albums might be less disturbing than others, and might be higher on the list, they're there for a reason. So if number 5 is more lyrically disturbing than a number 3, I'm telling you, I put it there for a specific reason. So without further ado, let's jump into the list at number 5. So recently I've been on an Earl Sweatshirt wave, so there was almost no way you were getting a list without him on it. The reason I put this album at number 5 though is because of its very lyrically disturbing take on suicide. I mean, Earl was never one to shy away from discussing topics such as, depression and anxiety, but I think this one was just at his peak of desperation. From the intro alone, you get a very toned down and dark track. Even though it's toned down and dark, it's probably the happiest sounding song on the whole project. Sounding almost circus-like, but if the circus was abandoned. It also adds to the eeriness, seeing how the track is less than 2 minutes long, so you're practically in and out of it instantly. The project is fairly short, being 10 songs with the listening time around 30 minutes long. You also have songs such as Grief and Off Top, which are very distorted and almost saturated tracks in a way. I mean, everything from the production to the lyrics to even a little bit of the aesthetic is very disturbing. I mean, the cover that everybody talks about is the black background with the words, "I don't like shit, I don't go outside," an album by Earl Sweatshirt. Even some of the alternative covers that were released post the album are very dark and gloomy, which around the time that this project came out was a very huge trend. Anyway, I love this album. I have it on vinyl, and I have most of the albums I'm going to talk about on vinyl. This one is just a perfect example of a disturbing rap album. So, yeah, let's get to the next one. So, I would go ahead and say that this album is in the same vein as the last one we talked about. It's very dark and gloomy, but the real creepiness comes just in the lyrics, pretty much. While Earl's album covered production and aesthetic and then lyrics, this one is heavily offensive and disturbing. One of the tracks that comes to mind when I think about this album is the track Tron Cat. Almost every lyric in this whole song is depraved, with the most iconic one being,
"Victim, victim, honey, you're my 5th one. Honey on that topping when I shove you in my system. Rape a pregnant bitch and told my friends I had a threesome."
I mean, most of Tyler's early work was very off-putting, so I was really torn between going with Bastard or Goblin since they both cover dark topics. This one, in my opinion, just takes the cake. I mean, when you have tracks like Yonkers, Radicals, Transylvania, Nightmare, Tron Catfish, Suck, Window, and Golden, your album must be off the wall. As for Radicals and Yonkers, this is more rebellious than disturbing. Just some of these lyrics add a unique hate and rage to the project. I find it oddly satisfying as well as inhumane. On the other hand, you have Transylvania, which I don't really know what you would call this song. Nightmare isn't really disturbing, in my opinion. It might be to some people how eerie and dark it is, but I think this is as real as Tyler gets on the album. I mean, this is where you kind of see Tyler's mental state deteriorate. I mean, you see it more on songs like Window and Golden, but this is when it starts. Alright, let's get into the bigger picture. For those of you who don't know, the real reason this is on here is because of where this album takes place. So Tyler has something called the Wolf Trilogy, following his first 3 projects, Bastard, Wolf, and Goblin. I'm not going to go too deep into it because I might make a whole video on it in the future. But long story short, in Bastard, Tyler's at school, he threatens to do things that get him kicked out, and his therapist, Dr. TC, sends him to a camp, which is where Wolf takes place. Now, in Wolf, he gets into fights with a bunch of other characters, so Dr. TC gets sick of him, and he sends him into an insane asylum, which is where Goblin takes place. Now, this is where you see his mental state go bonkers. Throughout the whole project, Tyler says his most disturbing and edgiest things. Anyway, that's enough about this one. I think it's really good. Even though I think it's Tyler's worst album, I think it's very unique and special in its own way. Now we got The Money Store by Death Grips. This is an insane experience that pushes boundaries of the traditional hip-hop stand. The album's lyrics are confrontational and cryptic, exploring themes of power, paranoia, social chaos. MC Ride delivers some of his best lines with aggressive and unrelentless energy, often implying abstract language. The lyrics are a mix of imaginary and fragmented narratives, creating this weird sense of disorientation and unease. The off-putting nature of the album, combined with MC Ride's commanding delivery, contributes overall to the disturbing aesthetic. Speaking of aesthetic, this album embraces the chaotic and industrial, from the album art being something different entirely. I don't even want to get into what that is supposed to mean. But even though it's weird and awkward, it sets a tone for the journey you're about to withtake. This visual aesthetic aligns with the album's experimental and boundary-pushing approach. The reflecting and unconventional nature of Death Grips' sound, especially on this one, even though I would consider this their most, commercial album in their perspective, it's the easiest one for non-fans to listen to. You even get the intentional distortion and glitchy elements. Not only do they complement the music, but they also enhance the overall atmosphere of the discomfort. In terms of production, on the other hand, I would consider this something of a sonic collage of weird samples and beats with distorted synthesizers that you wouldn't hear all that much up until this point. The production is done by Zach Hill and Andy Morin. This defies conventional hip-hop normacy, incorporating elements of punk, noise, and electronic music. The beats are unsettling and unpredictable, creating a sense of urgency and instability. The layering of sound is amazing, and the weird sample usage is utterly insane, in my opinion. The distortion techniques used to contribute the album's unique, unsettling sonic landscape is weird, but in a cool way, if you know what I mean. I can't fanboy over this album enough. I absolutely love it. But it is one of hip-hop's most disturbing albums of all time. Now, this might be the one that surprises a lot of people, even though most of the lyrics aren't as disturbing as other albums that we've already covered, but this is just a way deeper meaning to me than just the music and lyrics. There's a lot of techno and electronic music that is inspired on this project. Kanye has definitely came out and said that Tyler, the Creator, was a huge inspiration for this project, and you can tell just by the way that he raps alone. He raps with a lot more anger than usual. Also, Kanye just sounds very off on this record. You know what I mean? He's not there mentally, which, if you watch interviews and other stuff that happened this year, is totally true. I think the best way to describe this classic is very chaotic, which is amazing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this album whatsoever. From On Sight to the last song, I love every bit of it. This is probably my favorite Kanye album. I mean, I don't think it's his best, but it's definitely my favorite by far. I think it's just so disturbing knowing what was going on at the time and then diving into this album with the very dark themes and chaotic production and aesthetic. This aged like fine wine, though, in my opinion. Kanye was in interviews in 2013 saying that 10 years later we'll understand Yeezus. He was right.
I remember the first time I discovered a family member. December, I think it was. I was having drinks with my girls and I wrapped in Christmas lights, pushed them into the stinking cup, cut them up into pieces, and just when I went to drink it started, I thought I only drink this tap water. That ought to be fun. That's when my name is serial murder, man, ought to be good.
Now, in my opinion, I couldn't really make a disturbing albums list without talking about the king of controversy himself. Now, there were several albums from this man's discography that I could have picked from, but I decided to put this one at the number one spot. Before we get into the actual album, the reason I picked it is because if you look at the symbolisms between this and all of the other albums we've already talked about, it's insane. The eerie production from The Money Store, the time period is similar to Kanye's situation, Tyler's lyrics, and Earl's overall tone. The only difference is, this came out before all of them. Tyler has even went on to say that this is his favorite Eminem album.
Relapse is a fucking amazing album.
It is, but the accent is
9 out of 10. The accent actually made the song. The flow on Stay Wide Awake, from a flow perspective, not one rapper ever will be able to fucking touch that. The way that he mimicked, the way that he flipped syllables to rhyme with words that never rhymed is out of this fucking
It is
world.
better than Encore.
The storytelling
and better than
that
Recovery.
Album, from Deja Vu, you gotta be fucking kidding me. You gotta be, and I will stand by that.
While on Earl's song E-Par, which came out a year after this album, he says,
I'm zoning on relapse, she's sliding on blueprint.
So obviously, for the newer generation of artists who were making way more darker music at the time, this was highly influential. Now, honestly, I didn't like this album the first time I heard it, mostly because of the accents. But a lot of it was really to do with the media's perception. Since everywhere you looked at one point, this album was classified as Eminem's worst until Revival came out, of course. But when Revival did come out, everybody just kind of, gave Relapse another listen and realized there was something there. And that's kind of how I feel about it going back. I went back and listened to it a couple years ago for the first time, and I liked it way more than I initially did on my first listen. And after listening to it a couple more times since then, I've grown to appreciate it for what it was. But when I came back to listen to it for this video, it was something totally different. Just from the way that Dre produces it, with some of his most underrated beats, I might add. Now, I can see the reasons why people didn't appreciate it as much as his other albums. One of them, yes, due to the accents, but this is also just a whole different take on his Slim Shady persona. Because if you look at the Slim Shady LP, it's very tongue-in-cheek. You see the funniness to it, you see the comedy that he put into the album. Yes, you have these very disturbing lines still, but it's way more toned up, you know what I mean? You have these very fun beats, these very bouncy club bangers, but he is saying disturbing things. Then 10 years later, in 2009, when Relapse came out, it's all gone. That's not funny anymore. And the beats aren't trying to be bouncy and playful. They're very demonic and eerie. His humor is stripped and the topics are way more violent and gory than ever before. You still have the Slim Shady persona, but without his humor, so it makes it come off very serial killer-like. You're almost in a trance when you listen to this album. And going back, songs like Stay Wide Awake, Same Song and Dance, Medicine Ball, My Mom, these songs are eerie and chaotic. And if you take your blinders off, because if you go in thinking this is going to be a lyrical masterpiece, you're crazy. You will see the true genius of this project. And then you got to think about the time period. Eminem almost died from an overdose in 2007, then went to rehab, and 2 years later came out with his brand new album with a brand new sound. Now, Eminem has went on to say that he thinks this is his worst album, just from a writing standpoint, which I can totally see. But if you're looking at just the way the production moves and just his overall appearance on the album, I think it's his best. But since the album did come out, everything's kind of switched recently, and everybody's starting to see the potential, kind of like Kanye's Yeezus, where when it came out, it wasn't highly praised whatsoever. Some even would say that it was frowned upon. But as these years go on, people just seem to appreciate these albums way more than they initially did. And I don't know if that's because the generations have changed or what's been going on, but I'm glad these albums are finally getting the light of day. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye. Also, I wanted to give a huge shout out to my boy IC. He made the thumbnail for this video, which it looks absolutely amazing. So go check him out. His channel is in the description below. Anyway, yeah, bye. Bye.